Those who govern us always say the same thing. They are working for us, for our financial freedom, for our prosperity, for our future. They talk about stability. They talk about growth. They talk about opportunity. But if you look closely at history, you will see something far darker. If you are ready, we are about to venture into the dark corners of history that powerful forces have long tried to bury. Governments have always used hidden financial tricks to keep ordinary people poor while consolidating wealth and power in their own hands. And the shocking part is this: these tricks are not new. They have been recycled for centuries, wrapped in a different packaging, sold under new names, but always with the same purpose: to transfer wealth to the minority that holds power, and to keep the majority in a state of dependence. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a pattern, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. Let's start with the oldest and simplest trick of all: inflation. When a government spends more than it can collect through taxes, it has two options. It can admit the truth and openly tax its citizens, which is politically dangerous, or it can quietly devalue the currency, reducing the value of every coin and every banknote in circulation. No announcement is made, no vote is held, no permission is asked. The money in your pocket simply buys less, and the government never has to look you in the eye to take it. Rome mastered this tactic long before modern economists ever gave it a name. In the 3rd century after Christ, emperors facing crushing military expenses began reducing the silver content of the denarius. A coin that was once nearly pure silver gradually became copper covered with nothing more than a thin silver coating on top. The empire claimed nothing had changed. Same coin, same size, same face on the front. But everyone holding those coins paid the price. Inflation skyrocketed. Savings evaporated. Wages could not keep up. Merchants stopped accepting the coin altogether. Local economies collapsed into barter. This was a silent tax on the entire population, a trick still in use today, only with central banks instead of imperial mints, with interest rate decisions instead of melting pots, with quantitative easing instead of bronze coating. The mechanism is different, the effect is identical, and Rome is only where the story begins. The Middle Ages brought another version of this game: forced loans. Monarchs in England, France, and Spain regularly pressured wealthy merchants and guilds to lend money to the crown. Of course, these were not voluntary arrangements. Refusal meant fines, confiscation, imprisonment, or worse. Sometimes the crown promised repayment with interest, but repayment often came late, arrived in devalued currency, or never came at all. The government maintained its wars and its palaces. The merchants had no choice but to surrender their capital and wait. The trick here was coercion disguised as patriotism, wrapped in the language of duty, hidden inside the rhetoric of loyalty to king and country, and it worked for centuries. Because when the state controls the courts, the military, and the language of morality, resistance becomes not just dangerous, but unthinkable. By the 17th century, the financial system itself had become the trick. When England established the Bank of England in 1694, it was not out of generosity or economic wisdom. It was because the government needed money to fight wars with France and had run out of easy ways to obtain it. Wealthy investors purchased government bonds. In return, the crown guaranteed interest payments financed by taxes. This sounds like a fair deal, a simple transaction between willing parties. But think carefully about who paid those taxes. Not the investors, not the bondholders, ordinary people. Through duties levied on goods like salt, beer, and cloth, basic necessities that every household required, regardless of income. The wealthy lent money to governments and earned safe, guaranteed returns. The poor paid higher taxes to finance those returns. This was a wealth transfer system dressed up as national finance, and it cemented a pattern that remains alive to this day. The safest investments in the world are government bonds. Their returns are ultimately guaranteed by the labor and consumption of millions of ordinary people who never consented to the arrangement and never will. Fast forward to the modern world, and the tricks are everywhere. Only now they move faster, operate at greater scale, and hide behind technical language before most people even begin to ask questions. Take deficit spending. Governments accumulate enormous debts by issuing bonds purchased by investors, banks, and foreign powers. Politicians tell the public it is for infrastructure, for jobs, for social programs that benefit everyone. But examine where the money actually goes. Defense contractors, corporate subsidies, bailouts for financial institutions that made reckless bets, consulting fees for firms connected to the people writing the contracts. When repayment time arrives, governments do not cut spending at the top. They raise taxes on working people, surrender the money to inflation to reduce the real value of the debt, or slash the social benefits that ordinary families depend on. The debt appeared to be for the people. The burden lands on their shoulders. The profits go to the bondholders. And then there are bailouts. The trick that was placed on full display for the entire world to see in 2008. Banks made reckless bets. They packaged toxic mortgages into securities so complex that even the people selling them could not fully understand what they contained. They leveraged themselves to dangerous extremes in pursuit of short-term profit. When everything collapsed, who paid? Ordinary taxpayers, through massive government bailouts that transferred public money into private hands with almost no conditions attached. Who profited afterward? The very same banks. They emerged from the crisis larger, more concentrated, and more powerful than before. The trick was simple and brazen. Privatize the gains, socialize the losses, and tell the public this was necessary to save the system. Exactly who it was necessary for was a question very few were encouraged to ask. Even the way governments manage pensions is a sleight of hand hiding in plain sight. For decades, people across the United States, Britain, and Europe paid into government-managed retirement systems. They trusted that the money would be safely set aside. They believed it would be waiting for them when they needed it most. But governments often do not save that money. They spend it immediately and leave "I owe us" in its place. Promises resting on the assumption that there will be enough taxpayers, productive enough and willing enough, to cover the bill when it comes due. This is a generational Ponzi scheme hidden inside official language. It works until the demographics shift, until populations age faster than they grow, and until the system suddenly becomes unsustainable and demands urgent reform. And what does reform look like? Reduced benefits, higher retirement ages, payouts quietly eroded by inflation over time. People who paid in for 40 years receive less than they were promised. Sometimes not even that. The government calls it an adjustment. Notice the pattern running through all of these examples. At every stage, the trick relies on perception, on language, on the gap between what is said and what is done. Inflation is called growth. Forced loans are called duty. National debt is called investment. Bailouts are called stability. Pension cuts are called reform. The language masks the reality. A transfer of wealth from many to few, from bottom to top, from those who work to those who own, from those who trust the system to those who designed it. And history shows this has worked for centuries for one simple reason. Most people do not study economic history. Most people do not understand financial systems. And most people do not realize they are inside the trap. In recent decades, the tricks have only grown more sophisticated. Take quantitative easing, a term most people had never heard before the 2008 financial crisis. A term deliberately designed to sound technical, neutral, and beyond ordinary understanding. What it actually means is this: central banks create trillions of dollars out of nothing, use that money to purchase government bonds and mortgage-backed securities, and flood the financial system with liquidity. Politicians and bankers told the public this was necessary to prevent collapse, and in a narrow technical sense, they were right. Asset prices soared, stocks rose, real estate climbed, bond values increased. But who owns the vast majority of those assets? The wealthy, those already comfortable, those whose financial situation was already stable before the crisis began. For the average household without significant investments, the benefits were minimal. The downside came in the form of rising living costs, distorted housing markets, and a continuously widening gap between those who own assets and those who do not. The trick was that money creation saved the system for the minority holding power, while fueling inflation for everyone else and deepening poverty and inequality. Then there is stealth taxation. Governments rarely raise income taxes directly anymore. The political cost is too visible. Instead, they tax through mechanisms so indirect that most people can never connect their shrinking purchasing power to a deliberate policy choice. Sales taxes, fuel duties, import tariffs passed on through higher prices, and above all, inflation. When prices rise faster than wages, the gap is effectively a hidden tax on savings and purchasing power. You may feel wealthier because your salary is higher in nominal terms. But if your costs outpace your earnings, you are losing real wealth every single month. This is not a flaw in the system. This is the system itself. Inflation is not simply an accidental byproduct of economic forces. It is one of the most consistent and deliberate tools governments use to shift the burden of their spending onto ordinary citizens, without ever openly admitting that is what they are doing. Then there is regulatory capture. Perhaps the most elegant trick of all, because it turns the appearance of protection into its exact opposite. On the surface, regulations exist to protect the public. Financial rules to prevent reckless banking, safety standards to protect workers and consumers, environmental protections to preserve shared resources. But time and again throughout history, the industries that regulations are meant to control have ended up shaping those very regulations themselves. Railroads in the 19th century, oil companies in the 20th, finance and technology today. The largest and most powerful players in any industry have the resources to hire former regulators, fund political campaigns, commission research, and place their own people inside the agencies meant to oversee them. The result is regulation that appears protective from the outside but functions as a competitive shield on the inside. Rules complex enough to burden smaller competitors, but navigable enough for those with armies of lawyers and lobbyists. The public sees protection, the insiders see profit. War finance is another old trick wearing modern clothing. During the First and Second World Wars, governments issued vast quantities of bonds. Citizens were told it was their patriotic duty to purchase them, and they did in enormous numbers, believing they were contributing to something greater than themselves. Those bonds were also among the safest and most profitable investments available, guaranteed by the state, backed by future taxes, lucrative for those with enough capital to buy them in quantity. In the 21st century, the pattern continues. Trillions spent on wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, financed through debt, benefiting defense contractors, logistics companies, private security firms, and the banks that arranged the financing, while ordinary taxpayers shouldered the bill through higher deficits, reduced domestic spending, and decades of debt servicing costs. The trick is that wars are always presented as temporary emergencies requiring immediate and unconditional funding, yet the financial burdens last for generations. Long after the soldiers have come home and the cameras have turned elsewhere. And then there is perhaps the most powerful trick of all, complexity itself. Tax codes, thousands of pages long. Financial instruments so layered and abstract that even experts struggle to explain them clearly. Government budgets filled with hidden line items, obscure programs, and impenetrable jargon. All of this creates an environment in which ordinary citizens cannot possibly track how money is being used, who benefits from which decisions, or whose back the burdens are ultimately loaded onto. Complexity becomes camouflage. When you cannot see the transfer of wealth, you cannot resist it. You cannot organize against it. You cannot even name it clearly enough to explain it to someone else. In ancient Rome, debased coins were a physical, tangible sign of the trick. You could hold the coin in your hand and feel that something had changed. The color was wrong. The weight had dropped. Today the trick is buried in balance sheets, hidden behind acronyms, obscured by press releases and technical language deliberately designed to produce confusion rather than clarity. The mechanism is more sophisticated. The purpose is the same. Make it too complex for the public to follow, and the transfer can proceed unnoticed and uncontested. So why does this matter now? Because the tricks are not relics of history. They are active, they are accelerating, and they are operating at a scale that previous centuries could not have imagined. Inflation erodes savings held in cash or low-yield accounts. Debt loads grow larger every year with no credible plan for reduction. Bailouts remain the automatic response whenever markets wobble and the connected feel threatened. Central banks continue to manipulate money supply in ways that consistently benefit asset holders over wage earners. Meanwhile, governments pass costs on to the public in forms so indirect and so technically obscured that most people never connect the policy to the consequence. Never trace the mechanism from the decision made in a meeting room to the purchasing power lost at the checkout. The result is a system structured to keep you working harder for less real wealth, while those positioned at the top of the financial order grow stronger with each cycle. And here's the truth that makes all of it possible. Most people will never escape these tricks because they do not realize they are being played. They experience inflation as misfortune rather than policy. They accept taxes as inevitable rather than questioning who designed the system and who benefits from it. They receive bailout news as evidence of government responsibility rather than asking who is being protected and who is being made to pay. They trust the official language instead of studying history. And that trust, that ignorance of what the past has brought, is the most powerful trick of all. When people forget the past, they cannot recognize its repetition. They cannot see that what is happening now has happened before, in different costumes, under different names, serving the same purpose. This is precisely why a public educated in finance and economic history is dangerous to those who benefit from the current arrangement. Financial knowledge is not merely useful, it is a form of resistance. Economic history is not merely interesting, it is a weapon against manipulation. If you know the tricks, you become harder to deceive. So, what should you take away from all of this? First, always look beyond the headline. When governments announce stimulus, ask who profits first and who absorbs the cost later. When inflation rises, do not accept it as natural weather. It is policy. When new regulations appear, ask who wrote them and whose interests they actually serve. Second, build real wealth outside the traps. Assets that hold their value even when currency does not. Skills that remain valuable even when markets shift. Knowledge that compounds even while savings accounts are being quietly eroded. Third, never assume the system works for you simply because it says it does. Systems exist to perpetuate themselves and to protect those who benefit from them. Understanding this is not giving up on optimism, it is clarity. The financial tricks that kept Roman citizens poor are the same ones draining your bank account today. Dressed in modern language, administered through modern institutions, justified with modern rhetoric. The only variable is whether you recognize them in time. If you are curious about the dark and unlit corners of history that powerful forces have long tried to keep hidden, do not forget to subscribe.